1995. A meltwater lake appeared on Greenland's 79 North Glacier, and it never should have been there. About a decade later, satellites watched it start draining in violent bursts, ripping open cracks that kept coming back. And when scientists traced where that water went, the team interprets elevation changes as a subglacial water blister lifting the ice from below. So what is happening beneath this glacier? This is Greenland's 79 North Glacier, also called Neo-Halfjerdsbra. It is one of the last big glaciers in Greenland that still has a floating tongue of ice stretching into the sea. That floating tongue is huge, more than 80 kilometers long and about 20 kilometers wide. That's roughly 1,600 square kilometers of floating ice. Roughly a New York City-sized footprint, just floating out there. And that's just the floating tongue. City-scale ice, parked in the ocean like a frozen runway. Context matters here. The investigation was followed by glaciologist Dr. Angelika Humbert and her colleagues at the Alfred Wegener Institute. Humbert's team tracked the surface with satellites and then used airborne radar to see what those drainages built inside the ice. In northeast Greenland, another floating tongue, Iceworm, famously began breaking up around 2013. Today, only a few major floating tongues remain in Greenland, like Petermann, Ryder, and 79N. So when this glacier starts showing new fracture behavior, scientists pay attention. Now, we all think we understand glaciers. They melt in summer, they refreeze in winter, they creep forward slowly, like a slow-motion conveyor belt. But this story is about a glacier that started behaving like it has a trap door. A lake appears where there used to be none. That lake drains suddenly, not gently. And the water does not just vanish. It forces open fractures, punches vertical shafts, and then, in at least one case, it actually pushes the ice upward from underneath. So here's the deal. We are not doing pretty nature clips today. We are building a case. If you like mysteries backed by real measurements, hit like and subscribe, because we won't stop digging. Now zoom in on a subtle dip in the ice surface, right on the 79 North Glacier. In observational records, something new shows up in 1995. A surface lake of meltwater forms here. That is the first anomaly. Researchers say there were no lakes in this part of the glacier before atmospheric temperatures rose in the mid-90s. So the lake is not ancient. It is not always there. It is a newcomer, born inside the era of modern warming. And it is not tiny. The study focuses on a lake area around 21 square kilometers. That is not a puddle. That is a whole chunk of ice turning into a seasonal reservoir. So, if you put that much water on top of ice, where does it go? After 1995, it took about a decade before the first major drainage hit, around 2005-2006. Since then, researchers tracked 7 major abrupt drainage events, and 4 happened in just the last 5 years. That's not random. That's a system getting easier to trigger. When the lake drains, it is not a quiet trickle. The press materials describe massive amounts of fresh water reaching the edge of the glacier tongue toward the ocean. So this is not only an inland story. This is water being rerouted through the glacier toward the sea. Here's the scary part. During these drainages, enormous volumes of meltwater can reach the base of the ice sheet within just a few hours. Not weeks, not slow seepage. Hours. This is the difference between a damp sponge and a fire hose. If water gets to the base quickly, it can act like lubricant between ice and bed. And that changes how the glacier moves, how stress spreads, and where cracks want to open next. Starting from 2018 onward, the surface fractures started showing a strange geometry. Extensive triangular fracture fields formed during drainages. Dr. Angelika Humbert even notes they're shaped differently from other lake drainages she has seen. Triangles. Not random spiderweb cracks, not a single clean rift. Repeated triangular fields. That is your "this doesn't fit" moment. Because triangles suggest structure. They suggest a recurring pathway, a repeating stress pattern, something that gets reused. And the weird detail is persistence. Researchers report that the size of these triangular moulin fractures at the surface can remain unchanged for several years. Inside the glacier they evolve, but at the surface they keep showing the same outline, like a stamped shape. That persistence matches the idea that ice can be elastic enough to crack fast, but viscous enough to creep and partially close pathways later. So the next time a drainage starts, the glacier does not need to invent a new crack. It can reactivate the old geometry. Some of these fractures develop into moulins, vertical shafts that drop water down into the glacier. And these are not small holes. The openings can span several dozen meters. Several dozen meters. That is the width of a building. A vertical drain punched into ice. And here's the extra insult. Water continues flowing through these moulins even after the main lake drainage ends. The scientific abstract even notes the water level in these moulins can reach the surface and occasionally overflow. So the glacier is not just cracking once, it is plumbing itself. It is keeping pathways active long enough to keep feeding water downward. The paper describes the lake volume as reaching up to about 123 million cubic meters of water. A simple way to picture it: if you spread that water 1 meter deep, it would cover about 123 square kilometers. That is a city footprint, but in liquid form, sitting on top of ice. Now imagine that city of water suddenly finding a crack and dropping through. This is not crack, heal, forget. The observations show that the triangular moulin fractures at the surface can remain unchanged in size for several years. Radar images show they can still be detectable years after formation. And in aerial photographs, researchers saw shadows along cracks. In some cases, the fracture faces shifted in height, like one side was raised relative to the other. Even more striking, the cracks can still be visible on the surface more than 15 years after the first drainage. So the glacier keeps the scars. Ice-penetrating radar shows three-dimensional and glacial features that originate from drainage events. They can change shape over years, but they remain detectable. The journal's highlight note describes features inside the glacier from drainage events, with widths even up to about 1 kilometer. So this is not a tiny internal drip line. This is a large internal architecture being carved into the ice over time. The data also indicates the glacier contains a connected network of cracks and channels, meaning there is more than one way for the water to escape. That matters because once a network exists, the next drainage does not start from zero. It can reactivate what is already there. And that leads to the question we can't dodge anymore. If the surface is doing this, what is happening deeper, at the base? At this point you might think, okay, it drains, it cracks, end of story. No, because they did not just watch from one camera. They combined satellite remote sensing with airborne surveys. They tracked how the lake fills and drains, and they traced water pathways within the glacier. They used radar to look inside the ice and spot long-lasting internal features. And they used viscoelastic modeling to test whether drainage paths can close over time. This matters because glacier ice is weird. It behaves like an extremely thick, viscous fluid that flows slowly. But it also behaves elastically. It can bend and partially spring back, like a rubber band. That combination is why you can get sudden cracking during a drainage, and then gradual closing afterward. It is also why a pathway can, mostly, heal, but still leave a weakness that reopens later. So you think, okay, cracks form, then creep closes them, so the glacier can reset. Case closed, right? until you see what happened under the lake. Because the team is not just cataloging cracks, they are asking a bigger systems question. If a glacier gets hit with extreme water pulses on timescales of hours to days, can it recover, reset, and behave like it used to in winter? Or have these repeated drainages pushed it into a new normal? In the "Meltwater is Lifting the Glaciers" section of the press material, the team describes something that changes the vibe completely. During some drainages, the ice at fracture surfaces shifted in height. The largest shift is encountered directly in the lake area. The researchers interpret this as enormous masses of water entering cracks beneath the glacier and forming a subglacial lake there. Then, radar images from inside suggest something even wilder. Radar and surface uplift patterns suggest a blister-like pocket of water under the ice, lifting it temporarily. A blister, a bulge, a pocket of water trapped under the ice, inflating it from below. And in the scientific paper's abstract, the authors describe the drained water forming a blister underneath the lake that is released over several weeks. So now the story is not only water drains, it is water drains, reshapes the interior, and sometimes temporarily inflates the glacier. That is a trapdoor mechanism. The surface lake dumps water into the system. The system cannot evacuate it instantly. So the ice lifts, stores it, then releases it over weeks. And once you accept that, the bigger implication starts to form. Repeated abrupt drainages are delivering massive amounts of fresh water and lubricant to the seaward margin of a major outlet glacier. The authors raise the question directly. Have the frequent drainages forced the system into a new state, or can it still return to a normal winter state? They even note that in just 10 years, recurring patterns and regularity developed in the drainage, with massive, abrupt changes in meltwater inflow on timescales of hours to days. That is not a gentle seasonal rhythm anymore. That is shock loading. Here are the questions that should keep you up tonight. If lakes can keep draining fast as melt climbs higher, and old fractures keep reopening, is the glacier basically building a shortcut to break again next season? If radar still sees these scars years later, how much of the ice is already pre-cut inside? And if subglacial blisters can swell and release over weeks, what does that do to motion, stress, and long-term stability? If the drainages are happening closer and closer together, are we sliding toward a permanent summer mode, even when winter comes back? Because 79 Norn is a major outlet. If it changes, what other quiet glaciers follow next? Drop your theory in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories where the simple official version collapses under real data. Because this is not the only place in Greenland where the ice is starting to act like it has something to hide, and we're just getting started.